The Lost Caverns of Ixalan is Magic's newest expansion, and to kick off the celebration, I'll be ranking every legendary creature in the set to find out the very best commander. In order to figure out which legend is the very best, we're gonna have to take a few factors into account. Does the commander bring anything new and unique to the table? Is it too much of a build around? Does it effectively replace an old commander? After crunching all the numbers, I'll start at the F tier with what I think is the worst commander in the set and then work my way all the way up to the prestigious S tier ranking. I'll also be ranking the legends from the Ixalan Commander precons and the Jurassic World Collection in their own separate lists, so be sure to stick around to see those rankings too. As for disclaimers, keep in mind that this list was made before the release of LCI, so I may get proven wrong about some commanders over time. I also try to make these lists as objective as possible, but the individual ranking in each tier is kind of subjective based on my own opinions. Feel free to let me know what I got wrong and give me your list in the comments if you disagree with me. Lastly, many of the names in this set are inspired by various Mesoamerican languages, so I'll be using a pronunciation guide to reflect the way these names are supposed to sound when spoken. With all the preamble out of the way, let's get onto those lists. First up is the F tier, which is the home for the commanders that are pretty much unplayable. These are underpowered cards that are mechanically legendary for the sake of draft and sealed balance, but pretty much nothing else. Number 30, Eatskeenth, Firstborn of Gishath. As adorable as Gishath's child is, it's ranked at the bottom of my personal tier list. Sure, it's a low-costed dino with haste that kills creatures or triggers enrage, but why on earth would you ever run this as your commander? Between the main Ixalan set, the Dinosaur precon, and the Jurassic World crossover, there are plenty more powerful reptiles and better color identities to run, to the point where this little baby man is outclassed in pretty much every possible way as the leader of your deck. Number 29, Uchbenbach, the Great Mistake. As mean as this is gonna sound, the title of Great Mistake is pretty accurate about anyone who wants to use this legend to lead their deck. Vigilance and Menace on a 6/4 body is decent in combat, and the Descent 8 ability to reanimate it with a finality counter can sometimes circumvent commander attacks, but this creature is designed with LCI Limited in mind. It gets completely outclassed by any similarly costed commander within its color identity. Number 28, Amalia Benavides Aguirre. As much as Magic Twitter is taken to this geeky vampiress, it doesn't exactly make her legendary creature any more playable. The ward is a nice upside even if the payment is only 3 life, but her triggered ability is incredibly underwhelming. Explore is pretty good in limited, but it struggled to see play outside of standard of its time because all you can ever do is draw lands out of it. Non-land cards are either milled away or they stay on top of your library, so you're not replacing your hand full of threats and answers, you're filling it up with even more lands. I'm aware that you can use auras, anthems, and other buffs to get her to 20 power, but come on, 20 power just to wipe away the other creatures on the board? She's an Orzhov, a color identity with absolutely no shortage of board wipes. For such a hyped character, it's a shame that Amalia will end up being dropped pretty much as soon as she releases. Number 27, Kellen, Daring Traveler. Kellen was one of my A tier commanders the last time we saw him on Eldraine, but this new iteration on Oko's Sun is much harder of a sell for me. When he was first spoiled, we didn't even know what the map tokens his adventure half produced were, so I decided to withhold my judgments until the full mechanic breakdown in late October. Yeah, let's just say I'm much less confident in our Fae friend's viability. He's very fragile for an attack-based commander, and even if his attack trigger is successful, the creature only goes into your hand. That's actually pretty tame for 2023 Magic design. Seriously, just give me one good reason why I should play this dude over a commander like Tayam, Teshar, or Barrowin. Number 26, Caparocti Sunborn. Speaking of commanders that care about CMC 3 or less, this random uncommon is much more on level that I was expecting from Kellen. The Boros Signpost legend actually lets you cast the discovered card right then and there, and with the insane generation of treasure tokens in this current age of Magic, you're gonna discover something pretty much every time he attacks. Despite the upsides, it sadly still lands in the F tier for being so gimmicky and requiring such a setup to make it function properly in the first place. Number 25, Akawali, the Seething Tower. Like most of the draft signpost legends, there's not really much to say about this freaky fungus. Getting more powered up the further you descend is cool mechanically, but it does not make for a very unique commander experience. This draft chaff makes it so high on this list due to the raw power of the dredge mechanic and its ability to fuel the graveyard, but even then, you're better off by comboing with self-mill or playing some kind of reanimator deck. One powerful beater just doesn't quite get you there in a game of Commander anymore. With that short list out of the way, we're gonna move along to the C tier. These commanders are capable of leading a deck, but are pretty underpowered in comparison to similar legends. Number 24, Malcolm, Alluring Scoundrel. The ex-navigator of the Belligerent gets his second iteration in our return to Ixalan, but sadly, he's not even the best Malcolm in the game. A commander with flash and evasion is always a positive, and his looting ability upon damaging a player is pretty cool, but he's just not in the right colors to make full use of that ability. Mono Blue isn't exactly exactly known for its powerful reanimation spells, and getting to 4 chorus counters can be pretty tricky against 3 opponents. Jacob Hawken feels much better in the command zone due to the amount of free spells that he can accumulate over a few turns, and Malcolm asks for so much more work for so much fewer payoffs. Number 23, Vito, Fanatic of Aklazotz. The second incarnation of Vito trades the life gain and drain ability for an increasingly powerful triggered ability as you sacrifice more permanents. The fact that you can crack clues, food, and treasures for extra value makes it easier to get to that third and final trigger, but even still, Vito's a bit underwhelming for the leader of an aristocrat's deck. As neato as the new Vito is, this ascending triggered ability would be much better suited complementing a Teysa Karlov or a Lysa deck rather than taking center stage in a deck of its own. Number 22, Zoyoa Lavatongue. Another of the draft signpost legends, Zoyoa makes it to this part of the list due to the raw power of Rakdos sacrifice strategies. This goblin is far from the best at doing its job compared to Juri, Mahadi, or Garna, but even a single Torment of Hailfire trigger each turn for doing what you were already going to do is a pretty nice bonus. It's just another case of pretty good in addition to a better commander, but just not great as the commander itself. Number 21, Anim Pakal, Thousandth Moon. This Underground Stewardess is another typical Boros commander that wants you to attack, then attack even bigger next turn. It's an archetype as old as the format itself, and while she may be a slight upgrade to Krenko Tin Streak Kingpin, she doesn't compete with the best of the Boros go-wide commanders. She would make an excellent piece of a Winota deck, where she can be grabbed up by a non-human attack trigger and generate even more non-human tokens. But once again, she clearly fits the supporting role much better than being the main character. Number 20, Captain Storm Cosmium Raider. In the original Ixalan block, pirates were not only front and center like never before, but also introduced the recurring treasure token into the game, for better or for worse. Captain Storm synergizes very well with this token, making your pirates even more powerful with every artifact that enters the battlefield on your side. While you need some pirates to take full advantage of her triggers, you could very much run Captain Storm as a generic Izzet artifacts deck, but even then, she's up against some pretty steep competition. Joyra, Brutaclad, and Saheeli kind of already have that niche covered, and you're missing the black to take advantage of a lot of the good pirates. She'll be great in the 99 of the Pirate Precon or a Beckett Brass deck, but she's kinda subpar on her own. Number 19, Ghalta Stampede Tyrant. I know that there are plenty of dinosaur enthusiasts out here who may be surprised to see the new Ghalta so low on the list. This is because Ghalta isn't that great of a commander on its own, but it's an excellent ETB trigger to cheat out early through reanimation or through sneak attack style effects. Much like March of the Machines Atali before it, Ghalta is quite frankly too fair to be played on curve. As a commander, you're likely going to exhaust the cards in your hand to reach that 8 mana in the first place, meaning that Ghalta won't give you the same value that it will in the 99 of a much more powerful deck. Now let's talk about the B tier commanders. They work as effective commanders in their own right, but they don't quite have what it takes to be the best of the best in their respective archetypes. Number 18, Ojer Taq, Deepest Epoch. The first of Ixalan's ancient gods to appear on this list, Ojer Taq is honestly a little disappointing. Being a mana value 4 blue spellslinger commander that grants rebound, this snake god is very reminiscent of Taigam Ojutai Master. Ojer Taq doesn't require the attack to give the incredibly valuable rebound ability to your spells, which you may consider to be an upside. However, Ojutai gives you access to a second color and makes your spells and dragons immune to counter spells. The Temple of Cyclical Time backside is pretty good since you don't have to bend over backwards to trigger it, but you still have to wait at least 3 turns and pay 3 mana to get your Quetzalcoatl back. Being a side grade to an already underwhelming commander, this Ixalan deity lands at the bottom of the B tier. Number 17, Akal Pakal, First Among Equals. Mono blue artifacts is a tried and true commander archetype, and Akal Pakal follows a long line of similar artifact value commanders. In a world of food, clue, and treasure tokens, it's incredibly easy to trigger her end step sleight of hand ability, and the card that you choose not to put in your hand goes directly into the graveyard, which is exactly where you want your artifacts to be. Akal Pakal would rank higher on this list were it not for Emry, whose recursion ability is the better effect to have in the command zone. But this Oltec Steward will have a permanent home in that powerful deck. Number 16, Huatli, Poet of Unity. The first member of our Desparked Planeswalker couple is a little hard to evaluate as a commander. An Overcost and Sylvan Ranger is kinda mediocre in the command zone, but that Roar of the Fifth People saga on her backside makes up for the pretty disappointing beginning. She puts 6 powers worth of dinosaurs into play, lets them ramp you into bigger dinosaurs that you can later tutor up, and then provides a tribal anthem effect to eliminate other players. Compared to the other dinosaur commander options out there, she sadly isn't even the best commander in the main set, let alone with an entire dinosaur precon to compete with. Number 15, Breach's Eager Pillager. Our favorite goblet pirate, maybe second favorite Goblet Pirate, generates a ton of value for any combat-based pirate deck, but his biggest downside comes from his color identity. There are a decent number of mono-red pirates and changelings, but you'll be handicapping your own deck by not running a stronger pirate in the command zone. Between Beckett Brass, the OG Malcolm and Breaches, or some other Grixis pirates from the precon, you'll have a much wider variety of powerful pirates to work with, putting the new Breaches in the same camp as new Galta and new Huatli. Number 14, Saheeli the Sun's Brilliance. Huatli's interplanar girlfriend makes her return as a new desparked creature, bringing a little slice of Kaladesh along with her. Saheeli's ability is reminiscent of Felden of the Third Path, only with a wider color identity and the ability to clone artifacts as well. She'll definitely replace Felden as the leader of that style of deck, but she still falls pretty short as an Isn't Tokens commander. Rebecca is just better as a clone commander by using turn-ending shenanigans to keep the tokens around, and Brutaclad just makes for more explosive finishes and go-wide artifact token strategies. Number 13, Aklazat's Deepest Betrayal. Aklazat's has a neat discard token generating card drawing ability, but it doesn't give mono black players an effect that they haven't quite seen before. Most of the other gods in the set either do something unique or something extra powerful, while Aklazat's is in the corner looking like a decent support card for a better commander. The requirement to flip it back from its temple side seems easy enough to trigger in the deck he works well with, but that doesn't make the Bat God any more appealing in my eyes. Mass Discard is a pretty uncommon archetype outside of Wheels decks, but you'd be better off running Tiny Bones or Turok instead. Number 12, the Myco Tyrant. This Elder Fungus doesn't seem too crazy upon first glance, but don't let that end step trigger fool you. The Fungus/Saproling tribe has a tendency to self-sacrifice, so being able to replace an entire board of sacrifice creatures with more fungi only makes its case for leadership even stronger. While I think Slimefoot and Namada are still better choices for commander, their power level is comparable enough to the Myco Tyrant to make it a decent alternative option for Spore fans everywhere. Our next stop is up to the A tier, which features some very powerful commander options. These legends make a pretty compelling argument to be some of the very best of their archetypes. Number 11, Nikanzil, Current Conductor. Merfolk have been leading the charge on the Explore cards this time around, so having a Merfolk commander that makes exploring even more powerful is a really great addition to the set. Putting the lands that you explore directly onto the battlefield can get very explosive very quickly, and doubling the boost from non-land cards is just the cherry on top of this excellent commander. Tadiova is another landfall Merfolk commander that I think is just slightly better than Nikanzil, but depending on how focused your exploration deck is, I could see this commander and Tadiova being interchangeable within those builds. Number 10, Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. White used to be the punching bag in the commander community for being the worst of the 5 colors, but with all the support that Wizards of the Coast has been giving the color recently, it's arguable that red is now the worst color. One of red's biggest drawbacks is its pure lack of card draw, often being substituted with temporary impulse draw effects. Inti gives these decks the best of both worlds by discarding cards into exile and drawing you new cards to play with. Sure, the ability is tied to an attack trigger, but red is a really good color in combat, and Inti grows creatures incrementally the longer he stays on the battlefield. With the discard and the +1/+1 counter shenanigans that he coincidentally falls into, don't be surprised to see a lot from Huatli's cousin in the near future. Number 9, Sovereign Okinekahau. I'll be honest, when this Cat Noble was first spoiled, I didn't really think that much of it. There are some newer cards that care about creatures having greater power than their base power, but it wasn't until I went to look at similar commanders that I discovered that this is a pretty unexplored niche. Baird from Dominaria United is the only other commander that cares about this trait, and pumping multiple creatures even bigger each combat works far better for that style of deck than just creating 1/1 soldier tokens. Look, I'm not saying it's going to replace Hamza or Atraxa for generic +1/+1 counter commanders, but out of the options in a relatively new design space, Okinekahau is easily the superior commander option. Number 8, Kutzil Malamet Exemplar. You know, if I had a nickel for every Selesnya cat legend that cares about creatures having greater power than their base power, I'd have 2 nickels. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Anyways, what makes the uncommon Kutzil better than the Sovereign is pretty straightforward. The Grand Abolisher text in its first ability is an excellent feature to include on a creature, preventing your opponents from messing with your board on your own turns. Also, while you may have to deal combat damage to a player to get Kutzil's second ability to trigger, drawing cards is just much better than growing your already pretty huge creatures. Number 7, Abuelo Ancestral Echo. The Blink archetype in Commander is not only incredibly popular, but also very powerful even at the casual level. Abuelo doesn't push the archetype into any territory it hasn't already been to, but this upgraded Eldrazi Displacer means you no longer have to account for colorless mana producers. Having the permanent that you exile return on the end step is an important safeguard to prevent disgusting combo loops with Palinchron or Peregrine Drake, but it also reduces the raw power of Abuelo altogether. together. I still think Dorian and Brago are better choices for a go-wide blink strategy, but Abuelo makes a decent impression if your goal is just to blink 1 or 2 nasty permanents each turn. Number 6. Bartolome del Presidio. Aside from harkening the return of free sacrifice outlets to standard, Bartolome is also a welcome option as a commander. Sure, there are a lot of options out there for Aristocrats leaders, but having the sacrifice outlet / combo piece in the command zone is a step up in power level for the Orzhov color identity. The only factor that stops this legendary carrion feeder from rising any higher in the rankings is the limited combo potential of its own color identity. Prash is an iconic combo machine in a much better color combination, and commanders like Gave and Taya make for excellent Aristocrat combo engines within their own respective decks. Orzhov already has Rada Drobic and the OG Teysa, which both combo off in their own unique ways and just need the sacrifice outlet to go off. Because of the number of alternative sac outlets available, Bartolome still gets to keep a decent position at the top of A tier. At long last, we've ventured deep into Ixalan's core to uncover the S tier commanders. This tier is reserved for the best of the best, and will either replace previous commander staples or spawn new powerful builds of their own. Number 5. Ojer Taq, Deepest Growth. The Green Goddess makes the bottom slot of the S tier, even if she looks kind of underwhelming at first. Her ability is similar yet less explosive than Galta's ETB trigger, but you actually get to dig into your library for creatures based on the amount of combat damage that she does to a player. That's an enormous difference compared to spilling out your empty hand that you'll often have nothing to do with. Also, out of the 5 gods this time around, her temple side is definitely the easiest to flip over. Having the City's Blessing in a grindy game of Commander is easy to achieve by accident, so there's far less restrictions in place to get your god back online after getting god in the throat. Overall, she's a very solidly designed stompy legend that I think has a great shot of surpassing Goreclaw and Zopendrel. Number 4. Gishath's Sun's Avatar. In a very uncommon turn of events, I actually get to take a bit of a break on this list by talking about a reprinted commander. Gishath has been a powerhouse in casual Commander ever since the first Ixalan expansion, and it's pretty much been the de facto dinosaur tribal commander for the better part of the last decade. While the Velociraptor deck is adding many more legendary dinos into the game, I don't think any of them have the same casual Timmy appeal of spilling a bunch of raptors onto the table every time it attacks. While there will be some new dinosaur competition out there, I think Gishath will continue to be the apex predator of Ixalan. Number 3. Ojer Taq, Deepest Might. As one of the earliest spoilers of LCI, Ojer Taq immediately turned heads with its non-combat damage replacement effect. Players were quick to discover a lot of cards that would become insanely powerful by quadrupling their damage output. Just imagine cards like Impact Tremors, Goblin Bombardment, Thermo Alchemist and Friends, Grape Shot, and the Festivities, Hellrider, and so many more, I literally have run out of breath trying to name them. Couple this ability with his Temple backside, and he can even avoid the command zone if you play your cards just right. While it's not an outright replacement to Neheb in the big mana archetype, this red god is likely going to be the best burn commander in the game for quite a long time. Number 2. Ojer Taq, Deepest Foundation. Token doublers are both powerful and popular in the Commander format. Just look at the popularity of a card like Mondrak from earlier this year. Well, if you thought doubling tokens was good, Ojer Taq takes that ability and just says, another one. Tripling the creature tokens that you produce is just flat out insane, making this god the best mono-white token commander to run in a go-wide deck. Given White's ability to protect its board with cards like Rootbound Defenses, Flawless Maneuver, Teferi's Protection, and Assault Formation, you've got an incredibly volatile engine in your command zone for the late game, and you even get to pay it off with finishers like Akroma's Memorial, Cathar's Crusade, and Moonshaker Cavalry. Number 1. The Ancient One. My pick for the best new commander in the Lost Caverns of Ixalan goes to a legend that you might overlook at first glance. The Ancient One just looks like a hulking titan that requires a lot of jumping through hoops to work, but the primary use of this commander comes from its activated ability. Thanks to the raw power of a mechanic like Dredge, this ability basically reads Dredge, then throw your Dredge card back into the graveyard. Dimir is an excellent color identity for self-mill, recursion, and reanimation, and the lack of gimmicky restraints on the Ancient Ones means that it can be a generically powerful commander all the way up to CEDH. So that's gonna do it for the main set, but we still have 2 more supplemental sets to go over. Next up, we'll be ranking the new Commander Precon Legends, and unlike the main set, I'll skip over any legendary reprints. Kicking this list off, we have number 11, Titsine Gnome Champion. This Jeskai artifact commander specifically cares about double-sided artifacts, of which there are very few in Magic's history. Even if you take a quick search on Scryfall, a good chunk of these cards are either tokens or they're only artifacts on their backside, which means they'll be completely missed by Titsine's trigger. Then if you manage to craft the Golden Gear Colossus on the backside, you just get to flip double-sided artifacts and make some gnomes. A cool design on paper, kneecapped by the lack of options to make it truly work, makes it the very worst commander of LCC. Number 10, Sholatoyik the Smiling Flood. Turning lands into islands is kinda sorta Merfolk's thing considering all those island walking lords, but Sholatoyik is far too gimmicky to be very good. It starts off very slow unless you run some suboptimal lands that ETB with counters on it to make better use of the end step on tap trigger, and even then, just run Wilderness Reclamation in a better deck. Sure, you can be mean with cards like Choke, but that's a lot of building up just to be torn down by a single removal spell. This adorably massive sea creature is going to melt the hearts of the MTG player base, but this axolotl-inspired commander is not going to be very good. Number 9. Francisco Foul Marauder. Every great pirate needs a parrot, and after several sets with partner commanders, we finally have a parrot that cares about pirates. Being a generic partner commander, Francisco's placement on the tier list can vary wildly depending on who he's paired with. Even with the flavor win in mind, I don't think pirate decks will cut their Izzet core to put the birdie in the command zone. Malcolm and Breeches already has an infinite combo with Glinthorn Buccaneer, and the Grixis pirates cast the widest net to include the best pirates in all of Magic's history. Sorry Francisco, it looks like you're kinda just gonna be dead on arrival. Number 8. Weta Trainer Prodigy. In the first Ixalan block, the Dinosaurs had the Enrage mechanic, which would trigger anytime a creature would be dealt damage. This led to some fun innovation with Dinosaur tribal decks, using cards like Pyrrhemia to be able to trigger Enrage multiple times on multiple creatures per turn. As a part of the Velociraptor precon, Weta looks to take this style of deck to the extreme by fighting with your own dinosaurs and doubling their enrage triggers. While she carves out a niche for herself, I feel like her ability is way too specific to make her a very powerful commander. Number 7. Admiral Brass Unsinkable. On the first visit to Ixalan, the Pirates of the Brazen Coalition were all about attacking to trigger their raid ability, stealing your opponent's valuables and producing the brand new treasure tokens. While not all pirates are going to fall neatly into those two mechanics, the new Admiral Brass doesn't really feel very cohesive with the faction's previous abilities. At least she mills some cards upon ETB for the use of her second ability, but eternalizing your pirates makes her feel like a worse take on the Scarab God instead of the pirate captain that she once was. Number 6. Xavier Sal Infested Captain. Upon first glance, Xavier Sal is the exact kind of keyword soup that looks like he would make for a great commander. Exchanging your counters for tokens and vice versa has worked wonders for Gave since 2011, but unlike Gave, the Spore-infested pirate is unnecessarily limited. That sorcery speed activation window makes him a lot less interactive since you can't respond to a board wipe or a removal spell. You can get around his tapping restrictions with untappers like Intruder Alarm and Kiora's Follower, but honestly, why would you go through all that effort when Gave is sitting right there and he combos with a ham sandwich? Number 5. Cavaleño, First of the Blessed. Much like Vito in the main set, Cavaleño's attack trigger rewards you for sacrificing creatures, which lets you generate a Vampire Demon token and draw a card. Unfortunately, as cool as this trigger is, you can only target other attacking vampires, which forces you to run Vampire Tribal if you keep him in the command zone. Vampire commanders are already very well covered between Edgar Markov, Evelyn, and the many Innistrad legends, so it's going to be much harder to justify this Conquistador as your commander over the much better options out there. Number 4. Panthlaza Sunfavored. What's better than playing a rampaging dinosaur? How about discovering yet another one? Panthlaza essentially gives your already enormous dinosaurs a cascade trigger based on their toughness, which is bound to either find additional mana sources to make more dinos, or just find more dinos itself. Sure, this trigger doesn't compete with Gishat's combat damage trigger in terms of pure explosiveness, but having a commander that hits the battlefield several turns earlier and has a less notorious reputation may just help you sneak by for a few more turns. Number 3. Akbal of the Surging Soul. Unlike the other creature types represented in the precons, Merfolk doesn't have a single best legend to call their own. Simic Merfolk typically runs Kumina as its leader, but Akbal makes a pretty good argument to become a better Merfolk commander. The fact that his first ability triggers pre-combat on each of your turns is genuinely insane, helping you either grab a bunch of lands or dig to find a really good top deck, and his second ability either ramps your mana or draws you the card that you left on top. That's not even to mention that every Explore trigger also finds non-land cards and puts +1/+1 counters on that Merfolk, so you're pumping your entire board while you find a threat or an answer. Number 2. Don Andres the Renegade. Finally, a pirate commander that actually feels like a pirate. Stealing your opponent's stuff and turning them into pirates or treasure tokens is exactly on flavor for what a typical pirate would do. And while he doesn't steal things himself, that's what the rest of your deck is supposed to do. From threaten effects to blatant thievery, Grixis has a ton of options when it comes to, persuading other creatures to join your pirate crew. As much praise as I had for Beckett Brass and OG Ixalan, I think she's about to walk the plank in favor of this new scurvy sea dog. Number 1. Carmen Cruel Skymarcher. Taking the crown from the Ixalan Commander subset is a new aristocrats leader that even gives Teysa Karlov a run for her money. The fact that her first ability triggers on any permanent that any player controls is just flat out nuts. Fetch lands, treasure tokens, other sacrifice strategies, they all go into fueling an enormous life-gaining vampire. Then once you've triggered that ability just a couple of times, swing in and reanimate any permanent from your graveyard. That's right, permanent. Get back artifacts, enchantments, planeswalkers, literally anything you want. Even for the current era of Magic, Carmen is extremely pushed and is ready to take over the entire aristocrats archetype. Finally, before the end of this video, we still have our Universes Beyond crossover to dig through. Let's rank the brand new Jurassic World Legends from worst to best. Number 6, Indoraptor, the perfect hybrid. The return of Bloodthirst is honestly the only factor that makes me interested in the Indoraptor at all. Sure, you can make it an enormous menacing beater, but if you remove it, it doesn't really have the chance to do anything with its Enrage ability. That ability isn't even all that great to begin with because it'll only affect an opponent at random. Giving your randomly generated opponent the choice to sack creatures or take damage means that they'll always pick the option that harms them the least. This just feels like a worse version of Vile Smash that requires more jumped hoops to function the same way. Number 5, Ian Malcolm, Chaotician. Jeff Goldblum makes his grand introduction into Magic, and while his card isn't particularly powerful, it's very fun to mess around with. Izzet has no shortage of draw doubling effects like Fevered Visions and Dictate of Karametra, which will help fuel his second passive ability. Allowing players to cast cards from each other's decks is a fun, chaotic way to represent chaos theory within the confines of Magic. Ian Malcolm isn't going to win you any games outright, but it will make for some memorable games in your casual pods when the green deck starts casting Fierce Guardianship, or the Grixis deck sticks a Cathar's Crusade. Number 4, Indominus Rex Alpha. Keywords Matter commanders pop up every once in a blue moon, and Indominus Rex is just another in a long list of them. The biggest downside of this commander, however, is that setting up a nasty dinosaur is going to be really tricky. You're required to have all the keywords among creatures in your hand and then discard them away, and Indominus Rex ETBs with the corresponding keywords counters that were first introduced in Ikoria. Sure, you get to draw a bunch of cards back to replace all the ones you discarded, but compare this card to Rayami First of the Fallen. His blood counter mechanic means that Rayami keeps each of the keywords every time he returns from the command zone, while you have to set up your hand every single time you want to recast Indominus Rex. For that reason, I don't think the Jurassic Giant is going to become the superior keyword commander. Number 3, Owen Grady, Raptor Trainer / Blue Loyal Raptor. Super Mario himself, Chris Pratt makes his grand debut into Magic the Gathering with his Jurassic World character. When paired together, Owen Grady and Blue can effectively distribute counters to each of your other dinosaurs that you play, but their counter shtick is very lacking in comparison. We just got me in the Doctor Who Commander decks, who functions without the dinosaur restriction and keeps the counters when it goes from zone to zone. It's honestly kinda laughable to have such similar commanders in the same color identities release a month apart, but that's just what happens. Number 2, Henry Wu, InGen Geneticist. Sacrifice decks are pretty common in today's commander format, but Henry Wu adds a fun little twist to the mix. The flavor behind humans exploiting non-humans might be a little on the nose, but balancing the creature types within your deck can make for a fun little subgame. As you've likely noticed from my rankings throughout this video, I tend to give extra credit to commanders that draw cards and mana ramp because these are two of the most important parts of a well-tuned commander deck. Henry Wu gives both of these qualities just by playing a typical Sultai Sacrifice deck, yet even with all that praise, I don't think it competes with something like Muldrotha for the overall value commander. Number 1, Elian Allen, Paleontologist. Look, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that I'm not a huge Cascade enthusiast, but Elian Allen are just pure value in the best possible way. Their activated ability fits the flavor of their Paleontologist occupation by using a long-dead creature to discover more spells. Other than a creature in the graveyard, there aren't many build-around restrictions and requirements to make Elian Allen function, meaning that you can use it for generic value or cascade into specific lower mana value spells. Yeah, I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the linear Crashing Footfall / Living End aspect of the cascade and discover mechanics, but where loopholes exist, players will innovate. Just don't underestimate Elian Allen or you're going to be dug up and discovered much later on. So that was every commander from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan and its subsets ranked. This tier list was an enormous undertaking with a total of 48 new legendary creatures spoiled in less than 2 weeks, but I hope this video offered you something of use. If you enjoyed this ranking and you want to see more like it, please be sure to like the video and subscribe to keep up with all of my future uploads. You can also follow me on social media at JayoticMTG to get sporadic updates and hot takes from time to time. Until next time, take care.